right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining the second residential contractor and inspector training. I'm Courtney Anderson with Denver's Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. And as always, we have a lot of content to cover today, so we're going to just jump right into the interpretation slides. So this session is available in both English and Spanish. To switch, click on the interpretation icon at the bottom of the Zoom window and choose either English or Spanish. And I'm going to hand this over to Jeffy to stay in Spanish.
Esta sesión está disponible en inglés y español. Haga clic en el icono Interpretación en la parte inferior de la ventana de Zoom y elija inglés o español.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rachel Franzan, a member of the Energy Review Team in Community Planning and Development, and I'm happy to welcome you to today's presentation on considerations for contractors and inspectors on the residential provisions of the Denver Energy Code. And this training will run about an hour. After our prepared material, we will try to reserve some time to answer your questions. You may submit questions throughout the presentation using the Zoom Q&A feature. We will use the Q&A feature to respond directly to some questions during the presentation and hold more complex questions to answer live at the end. Questions about residential permitting that are not specific to the Energy Code may be emailed to residentialpermits@denvergov.org. During the live Q&A session, our moderator will read aloud submitted questions so our panel from Community Planning and Development can respond. If we are unable to get to all the questions, we will follow up with responses by email. Next slide, please. This presentation will be recorded and posted to our website, along with the other trainings in this 10-part series on the Denver Energy Code. Today's training is part 2 of 2, targeted towards residential contractors and inspectors, and it is our final training in the series. If you have missed any of our previous trainings, I invite you to watch the recordings on our website when they're posted, and spread the word by sharing what you have learned with your colleagues and other interested people. Continuing education credit is available for people who attend the full session. So if you called in by phone and would like credit, please email tom.gleason@denvergov.org. Next slide, please. This timeline recaps Denver's plans and goals for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from residential buildings. The 2022 Denver Energy Code became effective on May 1st of this year and is one step in a series of steps that's moving us towards an ultimate goal of zero greenhouse gas emissions. Energy efficiency is very important, but it alone does not achieve this goal, and it will take a combination of efficiency, electrification, and a greener grid. So this means we all have a part to play in making these changes, and we have time to accomplish them incrementally. The Denver Energy Code is grounded in input from a wide variety of community members and stakeholders, and we would like to thank all who contributed. Next slide, please. You can find the full 2022 Denver Energy Code at denvergov.org/building code. A second printing of the full Denver Building and Fire Code, which includes the Denver Energy Code, was approved last week by City Council and is available on our website. The included updates are primarily housekeeping in nature, and all the relevant content has been incorporated into these trainings. So please take a look at the second printing to make sure you are referencing the most up-to-date version of the code. I also want to highlight that Denver-specific ComCheck and ResCheck are anticipated to be available in fall 2023. Next slide, please. You can find a wide array of additional resources at our Net Zero Energy Hub at denvergov.org/energycode. A recording of this training and the others in the series will be published on this page, along with resources on specific provisions and compliance options. Resources are being added continually, so please check back regularly to see the latest. Next slide, please. You will hear us use a single reference to a code section in the 2022 Denver Energy Code. This is because the 2022 Denver Building and Fire Code adopts the base codes as reference. It is a good practice to check Denver's code first to see if there are deletions or modifications to a section, then reference the base code. Additionally, Chapter 11 in the Denver Residential Code is replaced in its entirety by the residential provisions of the 2022 Denver Energy Code. So now let's jump into today's presentation. Tom Gleason with the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency is our moderator, and Robbie Schwartz with Build Tank is our presenter. So take it away, Robbie.
Thanks so much, Rachel. I appreciate it. And welcome to today's presentation on the Denver Energy Code Part 2, residential contractor and inspector training, specifically on compliance path and existing buildings. I'm actually going to turn off my video right now so that you can concentrate on the slides, and then I'll come back on here at the end. Okay, so you can see on the slide here what we're going to be covering today, and I'm just going to jump right in and get started. As we begin today's presentation, I wanted to take a quick moment here to make sure that you are going to review the definition of residential buildings. Now, we've reviewed this definition in the past 3 presentations, so I'm not going to spend time reviewing it again here, except to really urge you to fully understand the definition and potentially take advantage of all the recorded presentations that are on the City of Denver's website there. In addition, all electric properties is a newly defined term that you should become familiar with. An all electric property is a property that contains no permanently installed equipment or appliance that utilizes gas or gas equipment for combustion within the building or on the site itself there. The exception here is for emergency power systems and standby power systems, such as gas-powered electric or gas-powered generators. Now, you also need to know that there's no exception for gas fireplaces, indoors or outdoors, or for any type of connected gas barbecue outside the home. Now, the City of Denver uses a variety of options to demonstrate compliance with the Denver Energy Code. There are 2 options within the prescriptive path and 2 options in the performance pathways as well. Now, I recommend that you review those specific prescriptive and performance compliance trainings that happened over the last few weeks, and that, again, are available on the city's website. Quickly, we're going to review some of the submittal requirements. So be sure to review and use the Energy Code checklist to understand requirements that have been implemented. Understand all the supplemental compliance reports that have to be generated for submittal, as well as to receive the certificate of occupancy, such as the UA compliance report, the cost compliance report, and the energy rating compliance reports that we're going to be talking about specifically today. In addition, you also should understand all the specific information that's required to be on the construction documents themselves. This includes the HVAC design, air sealing details, and the window to floor area calculation to determine the required U factor of the windows that need to be installed in your particular project there. When planning your project and creating the construction documents for submittal, we suggest that you clearly define the Energy Code compliance pathway, if the project is an all-electric project or not, if the project will have to comply with any of the additional efficiency package options in sections R408 or not, and how you're going to address the Denver Energy Code specific provisions like the on-site renewable provisions, EV charging, electric readiness, and water heater location provisions that we discussed in the last training last week. The building obviously must have a final inspection and can't be occupied until the project is inspected and receives its certificate of occupancy. All the additional final compliance documentation also must be collected and reviewed before the home is occupied. And this includes all the final testing reports, as well as the R401.3 certificate. The project's final R401.3 certificate is not new to the Denver Energy Code, but there are some new items that have been included in the certificate, such as the PV system information requirement. So it's recommended that you review these requirements so that nothing slows down your issuance of the certificate of occupancy at the end of your project. Also, the City of Denver has created an R401.3 certificate template that you can use. Now, there are certificates that can be created directly out of the software and printed out of the software. And you might see some hand drafted certificates out there as well that comply, especially when you're doing compliance with the R value and U value table compliance pathways. So ultimately, as long as the certificate includes all the required information, including the Denver specific provisions, any of the formats are allowed by the City of Denver, but know that you have this template that you can use if you need to. The homeowner's manual requirement is a new requirement for the Denver Energy Code, and it also must be delivered to the house before occupancy. The manual must include all equipment and appliance manufactured installation manuals and any energy assessment or energy rating index report, for example. Other pertinent information like the yellow energy guide labels for all appliances can also be included, but there's no specific requirement for what else needs to be installed or included in that manual. Okay, we're going to move on to considerations for the prescriptive path. And when considering the prescriptive compliance pathway, remember to go back and look at the other presentations that are now posted on the City of Denver's website. We'll review some of the items covered earlier, this time from a contractor's perspective, but we are not going to be reviewing all of them. So you should go back and double check those presentations. Again, there are two prescriptive options for building thermal envelope compliance with the code. Option 1 uses the assembly U factor and component R value tables, and option 2 is a trade-off approach that uses a total area weighted U value energy modeling approach to demonstrate compliance. When using the prescriptive table option, you must choose to either use the required maximum assembly U factors listed in the table or the minimum R value by component requirement listed in the table. This compliance option is the least flexible option because you're really only allowed to do more than what is required by the table there. You're not allowed to do anything less than those requirements. We'll see in the performance compliance options coming up here that they do provide additional design flexibility when you're considering the specifications for your project there. Now, we need to do a quick review of U factors and R values so that we can understand these tables in more depth here. A U factor describes thermal transmittance. A U factor is the reciprocal of the R value. So if you start with an R value of 5, it's equal to 1/5 or a U factor of 0.20. A U factors are used to describe assemblies, and R values are used to describe construction components. An R value describes the material's ability to resist the flow of energy, always from more to less, high to low, or from higher concentrations to lower concentrations. The higher the number, the greater the resistance to the flow of energy, whereas for U factors or U values, and those two terms are kind of interchangeable, the lower the number, the greater the resistance to the flow of energy. When using the prescriptive compliance approach, you can also use the R value computation method. For example, if you install a flash of foam and fill the remainder of the cavity with a blown fiberglass, you can add together the R values of each individual insulation component to get the total R value of the cavity that's been insulated. Note that in the code that continuous R value requirements are separated from cavity R value requirements, and that the R value table is describing the component R value, not the assembly. Therefore, it excludes framing, air films, and the like that are included in the U factor assembly table. And the U factor table is also used to build the code reference home that I'll be showing you here in just a few minutes. So this table summarizes the revisions in the Denver Energy Code that in most cases are different than the 2021 IECC. Be sure to fully familiarize yourself with the full table and all the requirements before selecting this compliance approach. You'll want to notice that for some assemblies, such as wood-framed walls, multiple options are provided in the table that combine cavity and continuous insulation. This is noted by the CI following the R value requirement. CI stands for continuous insulation. It's also important to carefully review all the footnotes in these tables. The footnote explains notations and provides additional context for requirements. For example, one important new footnote in the Denver Energy Code uses the percentage of glazing to set the fenestration U factor requirement when using the prescriptive U value and R value table compliance approach. Now, we know that windows are simply the weakest link in the building assembly. So as you can see here, the R value of a wall assembly is about 3 times more than the R value of a good performing window. Therefore, the lower the window to floor ratio, the higher the total wall R value and the less heat loss in cold months, for example. This is why the window to floor ratio is used in the Denver Energy Code prescriptive compliance pathway to determine the U value requirements for the windows that need to be installed in your project. Now, moving on to the second prescriptive compliance option for building thermal envelopes, it's called the it's called the total UA alternative. And UA stands for area weighted U value. And this is a software modeling compliance approach. You should note that if a project is designed to the prescriptive R value and U value tables and a specification change happens in the field, that you will be required to do, you'll likely be required to do a total UA analysis to verify compliance. And we'll cover that again here in a second. When we talk about using software to demonstrate compliance with the Energy Code, we have to understand the concept of the reference home and the rated home. So when we build a home within an energy model, the energy model creates 2 homes that are geometric twins of each other. One is called a reference home and one is called a rated home. Now, a reference home is specifically defined as a standard set of specifications that generate a specific, a consistent, and a quantifiable energy performance for that particular program or code there. So the reference home in this case is overlaid with the U factor table to give it that standard specification for energy performance. The rated home specifications are created by the builder and the design team, maybe the architect as well. The rated home is compared to the reference home, and if the rated home's performance is equal to or better than the reference home, then it will demonstrate compliance with the code. You can also see on this slide that there are a number of different reference homes that can be created for compliance with the different compliance pathways or programs and codes that are out there in the marketplace. So when we talk about total building thermal envelope performance and area weighted U values of the proposed building must be less than or equal to the total area weighted U value of the reference home, resulting from using that U factor table. The U value or the area weighted U value is in the energy model includes thermal bridging or framing, air films, and all the layers in the assembly, which is why this pathway is called an assembly approach for compliance. Section R402 states, 402.5 specifically states what the maximum area weighted fenestration U factor and solar heat gain has to be there. So these are what we call backstops, which ultimately prevent trading off beyond a specific point with the ultimate goal of protecting the building thermal envelope from excessive trade-offs. Now, trade-offs are referred to and are used to put something more in one assembly so that you can put something less in another assembly to gain more flexibility in the designing of the specifications for your house. Again, in this pathway, you can only trade off U values and R values when using the UA alternative approach. So for example, in order to get a balanced energy equation that meets the intent of code, the blue ball in this balance equation here might represent ceiling insulation that's R38, which is significantly less than the requirement in the prescriptive pathway for R60 in our ceiling insulation. In order to have that balanced equation, the 3 silver balls might represent better windows and wall assemblies around the building thermal envelope that exceed the minimum prescriptive table requirements and thus give us this balanced equation with more flexibility in how to design our assemblies that we're going to put into our home. The area-weighted alternative offers this flexibility, and it demonstrates compliance using R values and U values that are in those tables. And this is a method of performing conductive energy trade-offs. However, we have to remember that with this approach, you're only able to trade off R values and U values in the building's thermal envelope. You'll see in a bit here that the performance compliance approaches, again, allow for more than just conductive energy trade-offs, and thus more design flexibility. While there are multiple softwares available that can calculate the total UA of a building, only the ResCheck software, which is a free software developed by the U.S. Department of Energy, is going to be adapted to include the Denver amendments to the IECC. Therefore, no other software can be used to demonstrate compliance. Right now, the Denver Energy Code version of the ResCheck software is still in development and will be available in the fall of 2023. So to be clear, although softwares like Ecotrope and REMRate can do the UA calculation, only ResCheck is allowed to be used for the Denver Energy Code total UA compliance pathway, because only the ResCheck software will incorporate the specific Denver Energy Code amendments for prescriptive compliance. Again, the ResCheck software modification will be released in the fall, and this is an example of the ResCheck report that the City of Denver will require to be turned in at permitting when using the total UA alternative compliance option. Now let's look more closely at that blue box there. And in the blue box, you can see that compliance in this case has been demonstrated using area-weighted U values of the reference home, which is the maximum area-weighted U value, and the rated home or builder home, which is your area-weighted U value. You can see that 292 is better than 328. Therefore, we have compliance here. And in fact, it's 11% better than the reference home compliance here, or compliance that's base 2021 IECC compliance. Now, you'll also notice that the other blue box here, that slab edge insulation can't be traded off when using this pathway. So you want to make sure that you understand this if you're doing a slab on grade construction or a walkout basement that includes a slab on grade. Now, because the customized ResCheck software will not be available until the fall, the City of Denver has developed a ResCheck workaround so that the current version of ResCheck can be used until the customized version is released. In the ResCheck workaround, the additional calculation will have to be done by hand. We explained this in depth in the previous trainings, so you want to go to those trainings and make sure that you have a good understanding of this ResCheck workaround process. In general, if something is installed that is better performing than proposed in the prescriptive compliance reports, then you should be okay if something changes in the field. If something is installed that is less than approved by the building permit, or you will have to submit possibly a new UA compliance report to demonstrate that the trade-offs still creates a balanced energy equation and meets the intent of the energy code. Remember that you cannot trade off when using the R value and U value tables. And therefore, if something changes in the field, it has to be better than in order to pass code through the inspection process. And in addition, the city may require additional documentation, or you'll have to move to a ResCheck software modeling compliance approach to demonstrate compliance with the code. Okay, we're going to move on to considerations for the prescriptive path and these additional efficiency packages. Prescriptive compliance requirements that a project basically the prescriptive compliance requires that a project comply with the entirety of all applicable provisions that are located in sections R401 through R404. Additionally, the prescriptive projects only have to also comply with the additional efficiency credits that are required in sections R408. The number of credits a project must comply with is dependent on the building type and whether it's an all-electric property or not. All-electric buildings have an easier way to comply with these additional efficiency packages in order to promote building electrification and to align with the zero energy goals that the city has. Tracking the additional efficiency credits can be a little bit complex, so be sure to utilize the new R408.1 planning tool that's been embedded into the prescriptive code checklist that's available on the city's website. Here is an example of what an additional efficiency requirement looks like for an all-electric home. You need to choose a space heating and water heating option based on the parameters that are outlined in R408 of the table here. So in this case, you have to choose either a high performance heat pump or a premium performance heat pump for an all-electric building. And then you need to choose an option or multiple options that equal 3 or more credits to fully meet the all-electrical additional energy efficiency requirements for the code. For all other buildings that are not all electric, you will need to choose and implement 18 credits from the list of additional efficiency options that are on this checklist. Remember to review the recorded prescriptive compliance presentation or the Denver Energy Code itself for more information on the additional efficiency option requirements and what they actually are that you can choose from. At submittal, fill out the prescriptive code compliance checklist, which we just reviewed, and you only have to fill out either table 1 or table 2, depending on the building type, if it's all electric or not. In addition, you'll have to include your table choices on the construction documents for permitting of the house, because your choices will be reviewed for permitting and also inspected in the field to confirm compliance before the certificate of occupancy is released. Even though it does not offer as much flexibility, the prescriptive compliance options are more straightforward than the performance approaches that we'll cover here in a little bit. There is no requirement to turn in a compliance document that confirms that the energy specifications that were proposed were actually installed in the as-built home. Field inspection alone is used to ensure compliance. If you fail a site inspection, you may be required to provide an updated ResCheck report in addition to fixing any requirement that may have failed. Now let's look specifically at the total building performance compliance option. This section is R405, and it establishes a criteria for compliance using a total building performance analysis. The analysis only includes heating, cooling, mechanical ventilation, service water heating energy use, or building assemblies or components that directly affect the building thermal envelope. This compliance option does not include mechanical or solar trade-offs. And you can see here in the pie chart on the right here that heating, cooling, and water heating are the largest energy demands on the home. And that's why the Energy Code concentrates on them specifically. As I said earlier, the energy modeling creates two homes that are geometric twins of each other. However, now the reference home specifications are defined in a table in section R405 within the IECC itself that you can take a look at. The proposed design specifications are set by the builder and the designer. And just like earlier, the proposed design is compared to the reference home to determine compliance with this compliance pathway. So what does this mean for your project? The project design must meet the requirements in table R405.2 and comply with any backstop, meaning that in this case, that you cannot trade off below the building thermal envelope requirements as described in the 2009 IECC. Now, in reality, this turns out that this backstop is really pretty irrelevant for the Denver Energy Code, although it's written in the IECC itself and has been included in the Denver Energy Code. And the reason is that the Energy Code requires all electric properties to be 5% better than the reference home, and that all other electric buildings or homes be 18% better than the reference home. This means that the specifications used will have to be close to or even really better than required by the 2021 ICC, as the reference home used for 2021 ICC compliance uses the U-value table requirements that are in that code. So as you see here, the Denver Energy Code is asking you to be better than the 2021 IECC. Now, this is the R405.2 requirements table. And regardless of the compliance approach that's used for the project, there are these additional requirements that are in sections R401 through R404 of the Energy Code. The 2021 ICC removed the language that described these requirements as prescriptive or mandatory. They are now just requirements and are listed out per the compliance option that you choose to use. In essence, though, you can think of these requirements as mandatory requirements that primarily address the installation of specific efficiency measures in the code. We spoke of these requirements in more depth last week in the recorded presentation, and that presentation again is available on the city's website for your review. Now, especially when using the performance and energy modeling approaches for code compliance, it's important to realize that the holistic and synergistic nature of the Energy Code and how it's implemented. The focus is on overall building performance over individual components, assemblies, or specifications. But a change in one area of the building can dramatically impact the building as a whole or other aspects of performance of that building. Therefore, it's important for the Energy Code compliance to be sure the building is built to the approved drawings and to focus on the installation of efficiency measures so that they perform and actually pass inspection. And then if changes are made in the field during the construction process, you'll need to consult with the design team, which may necessitate an updated energy model to demonstrate compliance. Like the prescriptive compliance option, a cost compliance report for the proposed design must be turned in for permitting. This report must be marked as proposed because the energy model includes air and duct leakage default numbers because they haven't been built yet, because the house hasn't been built yet. They're used to determine compliance before the house is actually built. Now, the Energy Code details out specifically what needs to be included in these reports, as shown here in the yellow box. The most important to the Denver Energy Code is the cost compliance certificate that demonstrates the proposed design performs 5% or 18% better than the reference home. Here's an example of the cost compliance report from the run rate software. Note that this example home passes the 2021 IECC by 7%. Remember that this meets the requirements of all electric properties in the Denver Energy Code, but would not meet the energy savings requirements for a mixed fuel or non-all electric home. Here's another example of a cost compliance report. This time it's from the Ecotrope software. This house is showing compliance by 5%, which again is better than the 2021 ICC and meets the requirements for all electric homes in the Denver Energy Code, but doesn't meet the requirements for non-electric homes. As noted in the header of the software report, and regardless of the software that generates the report, it must note that this is a proposed design for permitting purposes, you have to realize that you have to create this report again and have it marked as confirmed in order to submit it for your certificate of occupancy to be released. The confirmed compliance report is your final site cost compliance report that includes any information obtained during the inspection process, of the home, such as the actual blower door and duct leakage testing results. If significant changes were made in the field, modified drawings may be required to be submitted for approval, and additional energy modeling may have to be performed. Now we're going to take a look at the ERI, or Energy Rating Compliance option. An energy rating index uses an energy model to perform a holistic energy assessment of the home. The energy model includes lighting, appliances, mechanical efficiencies, as well as R values and U values and more, to do what's called an asset rating. The ResNet Home Energy Rating System, or HERS rating, is the most well-known energy rating system out there. You can think of an ERI score, or an energy rating index score, as a miles per gallon rating for a house. So it doesn't matter who manufactured the house or the size of the house, in the same way that it doesn't matter who manufactured a car or the size of a car when you're evaluating that car from a miles per gallon perspective or listing or rating. An ERI index score of 100 benchmarks the reference home, and the reference home is benchmarked using the specifications of the 2006 IECC. So we should remember that the design performance presentation that we did earlier is available on the city's website, and it goes into more depth on the ERI system if you need to understand that in more depth. I'm going to continue here, though, to talk about the IECC and how the IECC used the ResNet ANSI 301 standard when they created the energy rating index score that's used by the Energy Code. However, during the IECC code development hearings, they amended the ANSI standard ventilation requirement in section R406.3. This change to the ANSI 301 standard resulted in an IECC energy rating index score and a ResNet HERS energy rating index score for the same house to be significantly different from each other. Therefore, like many other jurisdictions around the country, the Denver Energy Code has adopted the energy rating index based on the ANSI ResNet 301 standard with no ventilation amendment in order to align better with the HERS ERI scoring system. The goal of this adoption is to simplify the process and eliminate any confusion with the use of the ERI for demonstrating code compliance. So to be super clear here, the ResNet HERS ERI score is the compliance score used by the Denver Energy Code for this compliance pathway. Remember that within the software, there are two houses that are created that are geometric twins of each other. You have the proposed design, which is compared to the reference home. The reference home is, in this case, is overlaid with the specifications required by the ANSI standard 301, which is equivalent to the 2006 IECC. The proposed design uses the specifications that the builder and designer have specified for that particular house. The objective of this analysis is to benchmark the proposed design as an ERI score in relationship to the ANSI 301 standard here. What this means for your project is that the specifications that you proposed to propose in the proposed design need to be able to perform significantly better than the 2006 IECC. In fact, they need to perform well enough so that they can achieve an energy rating index of 55 or less for an all-electric home, and 55 and or 50 or less for all other homes that are not electric. In addition to this, your project will have to comply with the requirements listed in table R406.2, which are the same requirements that we just covered, the requirements in R401 through R404 that we covered previously in the total building performance approach. Note here that the additional efficiency packages in section R408 are only required for projects following the prescriptive compliance pathway and are not required when using either the performance compliance pathway, either of those performance compliance pathways that we've talked about. The reason is that the additional efficiency has been built in directly into the performance requirements for both the total building performance and the ERI pathway. So remember the 5% better and the 18% better of the cost compliance reports that are required in the total building performance pathway, and the energy rating index scores of 55 and 50 in the ERI compliance pathway. In addition, you should note that in the original printing of the Denver Energy Code, the requirements tables, that's the requirement table R405.2 and R406.2 for the performance compliance pathways, inadvertently included some requirements that are not actually required. So a second version of the Denver Energy Code has been put out on the website, and also an errata has been published that you should review to ensure that you're working with the most correct code language when you're determining your compliance pathways and determining ultimately compliance with the Denver Energy Code. As I said before, especially when using the performance or energy modeling approach for code compliance, it's important to realize the holistic and synergistic nature of the energy code. And if changes are made in the field, to consult with the design team immediately, which may necessitate an updated energy model. As with the total building performance compliance report or compliance process, your ERI reporting needs to be clearly marked as proposed for permitting and confirmed for in order to issue the certificate of occupancy, and also include all the information that is required by the code and reviewed on the slide. Here's an example of a confirmed home energy rating certificate. It clearly is labeled as confirmed up in the header of the document. It's highly recommended that you take out and turn off the code program compliance box on this report. You can see here that I X'd through that box on the right side of the certificate of this slide. This avoids any confusion because because this checkbox could demonstrate compliance with the 2021 IECC, but we know that compliance with the 2021 IECC is not the same thing as complying with the Denver Energy Code. So again, we recommend that you remove this section of this compliance report, which you're able to do within the software itself. Ecotrope and REMrate softwares are the primary softwares that are used in the Denver Energy Code and used primarily in the Denver metro area to report compliance with the performance pathways of the code. On the left side of this slide, you'll see an example of an acceptable REMrate home energy rating certificate. On the right side of this slide, you'll see an IECC energy rating index certificate. This certificate is not accepted to demonstrate compliance with the Denver Energy Code. So only turn in a HERS home energy rating certificate from either the REMrate or the Ecotrope software. Now we're going to spend the rest of our time and look at some existing building considerations here. Now, the Denver Energy Code addresses additions, alterations, and repairs, as well as change of occupancy in existing buildings in order to maintain or improve the energy efficiency of that altered building. It's likely that you'll have to clearly define your existing home project in order to determine what you're actually going to be required to do by the Energy Code. So you'll want to review these definitions of the Energy Code of the work categories for repairs, alterations, additions, and change of occupancies. So you'll have a better idea of what you actually have to do to demonstrate code compliance. In addition, you might have to ask yourself some questions about your project. For example, does your project scope fall into more than one work category? If it falls within more than one work category, the requirements of each work category are applicable and can be found in that specific section of the code. And that would be Chapter 5 of the Denver Energy Code. For additions, for example, you also want to ask yourself some questions because depending on the size of your addition, you might be required to do things that you wouldn't have to be required if if your addition doesn't exceed 20% increase or 300 square feet, whichever is less of the size of that addition. In addition, you might want to know if your building is an historic building or not, because the requirements for historic buildings differ from non-historic buildings. At certain times of constructions, we see that we have what we call opportunity costs. These are our greatest opportunities to affect the performance of the home. And these opportunity costs happen in new construction or when adding an addition or doing a renovation to an existing home. Addressing issues in the existing home at the same time as building an addition or renovating a kitchen is cost-effective and impactful on the comfort, the efficiency, and the cost of operating the home. Although not required, I always recommend getting as much information about the house performance before starting an addition or alteration of the existing home. This makes it important to understand your compliance pathway for existing building projects, as some pathways require pre-construction testing on the home that could alter your thoughts about how you're going to proceed with the project. Also remember that there are some pretty meaningful energy efficiency rebates and tax incentives available now that could also change the dynamic of the existing home project that you're going to start. New construction and work on existing homes are handled quite differently. The R408 additional energy efficiency options and some other requirements are not required for additions, alterations, and repairs when you follow the prescriptive pathway. However, if the house is building a new garage, a carport, or adding a new on-site parking space, the project will have to comply with those EV charger requirements, and you'll want to take a look at those. There are two types of additions defined by the Denver Energy Code, and you'll need to determine which type of addition your project is going to be creating here. There are additions that create changes in the space conditioning, such as taking an existing unconditioned attic and converting it into a bedroom. And there are additions that just add conditioned space or square footage to the house. There are two options for new building envelope assemblies when using the prescriptive compliance options for an addition. You can use the prescriptive U value and R value tables, or use the energy modeling approach with the total UA alternative. Regardless of the prescriptive approach you use, you will also have to meet some specific insulation requirements, fenestration and air barrier and air sealing requirements, as well as the vapor barrier requirements that are listed in the code. Air leakage testing for prescriptive compliance is only required for additions that create changes in space conditioning, like the attic that's converted into the bedroom. In this case, the air leakage rate with the addition and any alteration must be less than the air leakage rate of the original existing building before any construction has started on that building. So you're going to have to do a blower door twice in this case. There are two compliance options for new building envelope assemblies when using the performance compliance options for additions. First, the annual energy cost of the proposed design, that means the addition plus the existing building, may be 110% of the annual energy cost of the standard reference design itself of the existing building. In addition, you must meet the requirements of R405.2 requirements that we discussed earlier if you use this compliance approach. Alternatively, you can demonstrate that the annual energy cost of the or energy use of the addition and the existing building and any alteration that are part of that project is less than or equal to the annual energy cost of the existing building before you begin the project here. So again, you'll have to do an analysis before and after the project there. When using an energy rating index compliance option for projects undertaking an addition, the energy rating index of the addition and the existing building and any alterations that are part of the project must be less than or equal to the energy rating index of the existing building. So this is just like the total building performance compliance option 2 that we just discussed earlier on the previous slide. In both cases, this would require an energy model of the existing building prior to any work performed on it, and also after the addition was constructed. So you'll have to do that modeling twice at least. Prescriptive compliance for alterations use the prescriptive R value and U value tables only for envelope assemblies that are part of the alterations. So this means that there's no performance compliance approach that can be used. Therefore, you'll only have to comply with limited prescriptive provisions. We also recommend that you review the existing home section in Chapter 5 for these types of projects. Remember that regardless of compliance options, that there are additional compliance provisions that apply to additions and alterations. The HVAC, hot water heating system, and lighting requirements are examples of that. Repairs include the reconstruction or renewal of any part of an existing building for the purpose of its maintenance or to correct damage. Components of buildings or systems must be maintained to meet the requirement of the code edition under which they were originally installed, which means that they don't necessarily have to meet or be brought up to the modern day 2022 Denver Energy Code. Note that work on non-damaged components necessary for the required repair is considered part of the repair and does not need to meet the requirements for alterations. Projects with a change of occupancy or use to a residential building must meet the applicable requirements in Chapter 5, as it will result in either an addition, an alteration, or a repair. If the change is from a low energy demand category as defined by the IBC, or the International Building Code, occupancy, it must meet all requirements for new construction unless the change does not result in increased energy demand. The exception to this is when you use the total area weighted alternative to demonstrate compliance. The UA of the proposed design may be 110% of the total maximum area weighted U value that's calculated for the reference home. Okay, so the Denver, we need to remember, has a number of resources for existing buildings. For resources such as rebates for homeowners and guides for designers, please visit the websites that are listed on this page or this slide. This slide also has website information for contractors and on how to work with the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency on rebate programs and that are available for existing homes. The Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency, also called CASAR, is also really interested in any stories that you might have about electrification in existing homes. If you have a story that you want to share, please reach out to the CASAR team at the email on this slide. So lastly, I want to conclude by thinking about some of the key takeaways. Energy is an interdisciplinary, holistic, and synergistic discipline. The Denver Energy Code touches on many of the components and assemblies, and builders, architects, and trade partners must be coordinated and trained for successful compliance. So take some time and review the Energy Code before you start your project so you know how to best move your way through compliance with the code. Know your compliance pathway and the unique considerations and construction flexibility that's built into it. Changes in the field may require additional energy modeling or updates of the energy model or the drawings for that particular project. Understand the compliance documentation and reporting requirements that need to be submitted for permitting and also to obtain the certificate of occupancy. Lastly, with regards to existing home renovation projects, it's a great opportunity to upgrade the overall energy efficiency of the home itself. If you understand your compliance pathway and you're sure that the project complies with all the code, and meets all the provisions required under the section and pathway that you're using, you can often increase the efficiency of the base home, as well as the addition or alteration that you're trying to achieve there. So thanks so much for joining us today. We have some time for some questions. And if you have any other, if you need any other information, here's some website information where you can get that additional information.
Great presentation. Thank you, Robbie. So we are going to pivot into our Q&A time. And I just want to acknowledge, we'll be following up when we post the webinar, we'll follow up with a Q&A document where we'll be posting basically the questions and answers that we've responded to offline. And if we don't get to your question today, we promise to get to it offline and include it in that document. So with that, I am going to start us with our first question. I think this one is for Rachel. If the home is using gas, do you need an additional 13 credits on top of the 18 credits already required to meet the exception to not need solar?
Thanks, Tom. So the person asking this question is referencing one of our new provisions in the 2022 DEC, which we covered in last week's training, which is R404.7, or the minimum renewable energy system capacity. And this does require some renewables to be installed on site unless a number of exceptions are met. So one exception being if this is an all-electric property, that building does not need to install renewables. And there's a few. I unfortunately don't have the slides to reference right now, but in the case of a home that has installed gas, if you would like to get out of this requirement, yes, you would need to, the wording is buildings that achieve at least 13 energy efficiency credits from table R408.1 in addition to the requirements of section R408.1. So answering the question, yes, you would need 13 credits from that additional energy efficiency table. So this needs to be doing the prescriptive path in addition to the 18 that are already required for a total of 31. And this is only one option. You could have a home with a mixed fuel and meet one of the requirements to, as if you're installing high efficiency electric, water, and space heating. That's another one of the potential exceptions. So it would still allow for gas on the property, say, to be used for cooking or for outdoor fire pit or other uses. Then you have a substantially lower threshold of additional energy minimum renewables you would need to install. Difficult to reference without the slides, but I would like to point everyone back to our first training in this series, which was kind of an overview of compliance with the energy code. That one, we covered this in much more detail and have it broken out pretty well on the slides. So yes, you would need to install a minimum level of renewables on site unless you meet a variety of exceptions, this being just one of the options. Hopefully that was helpful and not more confusing than I meant it to be.
I think it was great.
And I'm going to keep us going with questions, and I encourage our attendees to use the Q&A feature to ask questions while CPD staff is here to answer them live. So my next question is, what backstops are in place in the residential code?
I don't know if Robbie, you would
Yeah.
be better to take this?
Yeah, there are some backstops, and as I mentioned in the performance compliance option, the backstop says that you can't install any R value or U value that is less than the 2009 IECC. And as I said, that backstop really is irrelevant to the Denver Energy Code because the performance that's required is already better than the 2021 IECC. So you would never be able to specify something that was less performing than the 2009 IECC. In the prescriptive pathway, I'm not certain that there are any clearly defined backstops
think-
there, except with the additional efficiency packages.
I think just the values themselves and the prescriptive, and there are backstops for the window U values if you're using total
Yes, that's
UA
true.
alternative. So there are kind of these minimum levels of efficiency that are built into all pathways.
Thanks for that help.
And that is time. So I want to be respectful of everyone else's time. And if they have another meeting they need to jump to. So like I said, if we didn't get to your question, we promise we will get to that and we'll post those along with the video. So we are working on editing and indexing all videos from previous webinars, and we hope to get those up as soon as possible. All attendees and everyone even who just registered for these webinars will get an email once those are posted. So you can check the denvergov.org/energy code site, but you can also keep an eye on your email for that. So we want to thank everyone for your participation. This is the final webinar in a 10-part series. We hope that this has been helpful content, and we will do our best to get this up on the website as quickly as possible so we can continue to assist. So if you have any additional questions, here is our contact information up on the slide right now. And we just want to thank you for your attendance and participation.